Welcome back, family. Urban Beats Radio 2, Chopping It Up with the Chef. Today, I am honored to have retired New York Police Department Detective Second Grade David Watson, who is also the founder and CEO of Caribbean Law Enforcement Foundation. Today, we wanted to just have a conversation on some of the events that's been going on with us in America. And they've been a little troubling concerning police brutality and the treatment of people of color. And I wanted to bring someone in that had the experience and knowledge of the police force and some of his views on those things. The number one question, my brother, is where does the feeling or the need for the type of treatment or actions taken by the current police and even those in the past, where does it come from? What is your feeling on that?
Well, I would say a lot of these feelings, no, this is not every police officer, it's only some.
True enough.
Most police officers, black or white, or whatever race they are good people, okay? So sometimes there's a feel of us versus them. So I always, when I train folks in my time, because I train young men and women who want to be police officers, or guys coming into the precinct or wherever they were, in training, I said, look, do not lose yourself in this job. That's number one. A lot of them want to fit in and belong. So it's a systemic issue. So you have an older cop training a new cop.
Mentoring.
Right? So I'll give an example, okay? And this is just from my personal experience. And again, this is not all police officers. It's a very minute part. When I was a rookie in the precinct in Brooklyn, back then we had something called field training, where all the rookies piled into a van and we went around the neighborhood to show the cops, well, this is Brooklyn or this is Queens, this is Manhattan, these are the hot spots, these are the areas where we have most problems. I never call them good and bad neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They're all good people. Right. You have neighborhoods with issues sometimes. That's about it. So it was myself and another officer who were, black officer would be back in the van, just sitting there having conversations. I knew the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So I wanted the rest of the guys to get more feel from the field training officer. And one of the white officer says, oh, look at these animals out there. So they forgot I was the back of the van, me and this other officer. So I said, excuse me, what do you mean by that? And they looked back like, oh, I didn't mean you. I said, no. Later this evening, when I take this uniform off later, right, and I'm walking down Utica Avenue to the subway, I'm one of those animals.
Right.
Because you don't see me, you see a black man walking down the street. Exactly. Again, that's a minute amount of officers. So and where do I learn that from? This is something that just came out. It could have been a issue where that's what he was brought up on in his own family, or maybe heard up from another cop. All right. So I had to correct him at that point in time. So listen, these are good people out here. All right. So a part of it is this: is a systemic issue with training initially, where some new cops are corrupted by the older cops on their behaviors, their thought processes. So a person cannot, if you're a good person coming in, leave that job a good person. That's the whole thing, So that's one issue. Another issue is that in terms of working with the neighborhood, another story. Each story I tell is going to relate why it needs to be corrected, and why we as black or brown people or whatever color we are, or even I've known white officers who my old partner. Anthony Hanlon, God bless his soul, he died about a year ago. Mm. White guy, but worked very well with the minority kids.
The right.
There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, we all have to play a part. I ran a track team in the precinct where I worked, and it was one of two track teams in the whole city that was run by a police officer. There's only one left right now, and that's in Brooklyn in the 67th precinct. Officer Barry, she still runs the precinct up to this day.
Still got it going.
And I ran one back then, this is back in the early 90s. And an officer says, Watson, why do you do stuff with these kids in this neighborhood. So I looked at him and said, listen, you live in Long Island, right? He says, yeah. He says, there's a local father, coach, whatever, lives in that neighborhood as the Little League. They have the baseball, the basketball.
Right.
And that's a parent from that neighborhood. He says, correct. And he says, well, I'm a parent and I live in Brooklyn.
Right.
That was the end of the conversation. That was it.
Simple.
So it was very simple to explain, hey, look, a lot of officers, again, have to play a part to connect with the neighborhood. Okay, it's not you versus them. You have to work within the neighborhood where you work. That's one thing. Yes, there's enforcement. Yes, I've arrested folks. That comes with the job. But I can't say there are some bad interactions, but 99% of the arrests I made, I never had an issue with these guys. These guys, because I live 2
blocks over?
Not 2 blocks over, but in the realm of Brooklyn, I would see these guys on an average day.
Right.
And I've seen them with my kids walking through the park. Hey, Officer Watson, how you doing? I said, what's up, man? How you been? And I never had any issues because it's all about, it's never personal. That's the whole thing. Do not take, an officer shouldn't take the job personal. It's a profession, it's a job, it's an honorable profession. Do it as if you were a doctor, nurse, whatever. You come in, you treat that person with respect. It's the same thing. Yes, there's people who give you a hard time.
Right.
That comes, but the ability to talk a person down instead of escalating.
Right.
Is one, and again, doesn't work every time. But you know what? And in 23 years of working for the NYPD, I can't say that I've had a situation where I had threats to my life, to my family. I've made a lot of arrests. Yes.
Because you've made connections.
But yet you treat the folks with respect, regardless of what they do. It's a job. You know you did wrong, so you're getting arrested. Right. But then there's the other part of here. You have the good people in the neighborhood. You work with them, talk to them, have a conversation. Another story. I worked on now it's a different neighborhood now, Franklin Avenue in Brooklyn. I called it back then a drug supermarket. You had your crack one down a little further, you have your marijuana here, you had your heroin over here. So, that's my old beat. And this comes in the extreme part of it. A drug dealer comes to me and says, Officer Watson, man, I got an issue. All right? My girlfriend's on my case about child support. Me having a conversation with this, because he knows that I'm watching him for his drug sales and you can get arrested if they catch you. And they understand that. But he be having a personal conversation about him and his girlfriend and child support. I give him some great advice. Yes, but he knows if I see him doing the wrong thing, he's gonna get arrested.
You gotta go.
I can't call it a game, but the thing is, they knew if they were caught really good, So it's just how you interact with folks. You arrest a person, once you behave yourself, hey, you hungry? Sure, officer. Okay, got any money on you? I'll go next door and buy you a sandwich.
With the handcuffs on them.
No, not my handcuffs. I'll leave him in the cell, but I'll take his money, go next door, buy him a sandwich, and bring it back. It's some bodegas and stuff like that. It's funny. It sounds funny, but I've done that.
Yeah.
So it's all up there, people. That's the whole point.
Right.
Good or bad, there are people in these neighborhoods. We ran a lot of different things, and we knew these folks because we had good officers who ran programs in these neighborhoods, and my guys I worked with did the same thing. But overall, that us versus them has to go. Right. That's the one, and it's a systemic issue. It's not going to correct itself right now. It's going to take a bunch of years. It took years to get to this point. Right. It's going to take a bunch more years to get them out of this situation.
Right. And shout out to Long Island, Central Islip. I used to stay out there. Just wanted to put that in. But in all seriousness, moving forward, what do you see? How do you feel with your experience? How do you see us being able to correct or to curb some of those thoughts and actions that we see more often now because of social media and the cameras and officers on the force?
Okay. Moving forward, the first thing I'm going to tell these young men, young women, some of the older people out there, if an officer stops you, comply. If you have an issue with it, as simple as you don't have to put the camera in their face, and that's going to draw more attention. As soon as you get stopped or whatever, or you feel you're going to be stopped, hit record on your, audio recordings still fly. I mean, you folks want to put that stuff on World Star or whatever, but audio still works. Hit record on your phone and you have the interaction. It may end positive, it may end negative, but you, as officer, yes, can I help you?
Right.
No, why am I being stopped? And most officers tell you why you're being stopped. Just comply. If you feel that there's something wrong, there's resources out there to make a complaint. You have your audio of the whole situation. You go to that local complaint review board or whatever system they have in place to make complaints, and you make a complaint. If you feel that your rights were violated, then you make a complaint. But but try not to get in that confrontational match with an officer.
And escalate the situation.
And if you know you're wrong, If you have no seatbelt on, you know you were speeding, please don't start. You know you were speeding. Right. Just be honest with yourself, all right? Do not get in that back and forth confrontation. And that's the one thing I gotta say to the folks out there. And I see a lot of these interactions. And when you start up here, a lot of times, officers shouldn't take it personal because this person may have a bad interaction with the officer maybe yesterday.
Right.
And that goes both ways. So you got to treat every person, be it the officer or for yourself, differently. Right. Or that's one thing. That's going to get that out there first of all. Just comply with the officer. All right. Moving forward with the officers now, it comes with training. And sadly, not everyone has that personable behavior pattern.
Right.
If you think law enforcement is I'm the tough guy on the block and you gonna hear what I say and that's it. No, it's not that. You're working in this neighborhood with these folks. You have to live. That's the same lady, Miss Jones, that sees you in the scuffle, who would call the help for you if you can't get to your radio.
Right.
Hey, look, there's an officer being beat up on, that's the same lady or the people who will call for you to get some help coming your way.
Right.
So you got to look from that point of view, especially if you're a neighbor, if you are the same cop traversing that same neighborhood. Moving forward, adults, we all adults, we are set in our ways. We have certain behavior patterns. It's not saying you can't teach old dogs new tricks. Mm-hmm. We can still learn, but where's the issues right now? The youth. Who's breaking into these stores and stealing Nikes or these riots? That's opportunists. They're not for the demonstration. They're there to be opportunists. But you got to start with the youth about consequences of things you do in life. All right? Cops have to build that connection back into schools. There were programs like DARE and GREAT and different programs that work well in the schools. Not saying that they're the best programs out there. They need to reevaluate these programs, come with some new programs,
right.
But get that officer back into the schools to interact with these kids on a positive note.
Right.
Okay? A lot of these programs, either they're underfunded, but they're needed in schools. It doesn't have to be DARE or GREAT. They can develop other systems of, hey, look, maybe some kind of alternate program of how to educate kids on law and consequences, for instance. Some do have that kind of program.
And those kind of programs also help the kids understand that the police aren't bad.
There you go.
We can talk to them, because I remember back when I was in high school, we had those programs in Miami. And, a lot of the police officers, whenever I was down on South Beach, I would see them, So I see exactly where you're coming from with that.
So again, you got to build those relationships. And I can't leave out where a lot of these issues stem from is the lack of funding for after-school programs. A lot of our neighborhoods, you may call them depressed neighborhoods, what do you want to call them? A lot of our neighborhoods are lacking funding. Average person out there making minimum wage can't afford to send their kids to a music class or to swim camp to, I was a police officer in New York City and I couldn't afford to send my kids to some of these things in the summer. I'll have to find a free program to send my kids
That's right.
These things are expensive.
Boys and Girls Club.
So they need to put more resources in those programs because if a child, a young man or young woman doesn't have a direction to go to, they're gonna find it somewhere else. Kids need nourishment. They're growing trees. A child is a product of the environment. That's the main thing here. They're a product of the environment which they grow in. If you have these programs, and this stems now, and this is not a fault, we always get as an officer to saying, well, you need to change these laws. I said, sir, ma'am, I don't change laws. That's up to the politicians. I don't make this funding. That's up to the politicians. And that's where it starts, with the politicians. They have to put money back in these after-school programs. That's one thing, because in the precinct where I worked, in the 7-7 precinct, big enough for 7-7 precinct, we had some really good officers back in the day. I mean, I go far back as guys called Vernon Wells, Todd Taylor, Dion Harris, Erica Easton. These guys who were all, we did programs on our own time.
Right.
We did the basketball, the flag football, the double dutch. We did all these things because there was a lack, and the schools worked with us because there was a lack of funding in these schools. And you know, all these guys now have these young men and women who are grown adults now, who are doing so well. So it does work. You can't tell me that after-school programs do not work. They do work. Because the kids need to channel that energy somewhere else other than on the streets, running around slinging or robbing folks or whatever. And not saying that every kid is that's doing those things, but they need that energy to be channeled. And I'll tell you why it works. I've proven it. I ran a program called the Law Enforcement Exploring Program for New York City, which is kids who are interested in law enforcement careers. And the city averaged about 2,000 a year, and my unit ran the whole program. There were every precinct, every house in PSA, and every transit district. The thing is, these kids wanted to become officers, and we had the opportunity to train them that way. And because in minority neighborhoods, no one's telling these kids how to become an officer. Why is it that in some neighborhoods, law enforcement is top heavy with the Caucasian officer versus the Black or brown officer? Because we do not tell our kids how to become a police officer. And that's what the program did. But I found that although the program was there, the officers involved, some of them weren't doing the right thing to educate these kids. It's not a daycare. It's to tell these kids, this is law enforcement. If you're interested, this is the process of how to get there.
And these are the steps.
Right. And I made a motto with my kids I train personally that you may leave the program, which means the program was from 14 to 21. You may leave the program, but I will never leave you. Which means you may age out the program, but I will stick with you till you get that career. And I did that. I got guys who went to the military, still calling me every day from Korea, from Afghanistan. I kept in contact with them on a daily basis. Are you on the government money right now? Call me. Say, yeah. So, and they would call me every day. And now most of these guys are, I can go a list like DEA, they're in NSA police, they're in NYPD, they're in other states all over the place. And they're good officers, but they had the benefit of me telling that person, this is what you need to do to get this career and to do it successfully. Because some of these kids have one foot in jail and one foot in a decent career. And I stuck with these kids from 14 to the age, and someone now almost 30 years old, and they still call me for advice. That's the whole thing. That thing, each one teach one.
Each one teach one.
It should change it. Each one teach many.
Solid.
All right? So it does work. These mentorship programs do work. The other thing is these hit and miss programs. You have a summer program in some neighborhoods. That's great, but then what happens to that kid after the summer? Where's the continual interaction? Not that saying law enforcement are social workers, but you kind of are in a sense.
You are.
But you are there, and some guys are in precincts or some situation for like 20 plus years. You have time to develop relationships in these precincts or whatever unit you're in. And so there has to be a long-term goal to help some of these kids. And that doesn't go only for law enforcement. That goes for us as a people.
Right.
Each one teach one, each one teach many.
All the time.
So you have to gear these kids to be successful. And I've had a 99% success rate. I got one guy who's in jail.
Wow.
You can't even listen, but
always one.
But always one, you're always gonna lose one. But you know what? But we're so taught.
Right.
He called me from prison all the time. Hey, Watson, how you doing? On a regular basis. He calls me still. And if we talk about going to school, did I give up on him? Absolutely not.
Right.
He got in the wrong, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. A good kid, but you cannot give up on these kids. So moving forward, again, there's after-school programs. There's the consistency with law enforcement working with kids in the school. Because what does the mother do with the kid when he's misbehaving? See that officer? He's gonna lock you
He's
up.
gonna lock you up.
You know?
Officer, you see him?
But that's a fun thing for some parents, but then it builds a negative connotation in the
kid's mind.
How about saying, hey, see the officer? One day you can be just like him.
Right.
That's positive reinforcement.
Right.
And I've been through a lot with a lot of people, man. It's interesting that I've seen the evolution over the years. Like I said, officers, and even not waiting on any special program, they're great or whatever program they develop, that local officer should go to the school and adopt the school. Actually, I recommended that a couple of years ago. It was shot down, but whatever. And I said, look, we have enough officers, and I worked in community affairs in NYPD in my last couple of years running the program. I said, look, I've proven that I like to study stuff and see patterns in the long term. I actually took a school, one of the worst schools in the precinct. I made a 1-year project. Unfortunately, it was my last year in the precinct, so I got transferred afterwards. And the school was, if you want to call it, the word is bad, but the kids were good kids. I went from class to class to class to class in that whole year. You know what? In that year, we didn't really have no real fights or issues. Right. I explained to them the consequences of bad behavior and said, you as a child may think you can't get arrested, but there's certain things, if you do, you can get arrested. And they, wow, really? Yeah, so for that test for that year, we never had any issues. So it does show that kids do listen. If you come in and you have a conversation, you don't talk down to them, you have a conversation with these young men and women. And you know what? It absolutely works. It absolutely works.
Thank you so much for all that great information. Thank you for your time. And if you want to get in contact with David Watson, Caribbean Law Enforcement Foundation, they contact you where? Yeah.
My email is david.watson@Caribbean, is CaribbeanLEF.org. All right?
Thank you.